We are now going to move on to our next speaker. You may recall back in May that the UK Community Renewal Fund was open, and there was a huge amount of interest for this opportunity. We thought it would be really useful to get some feedback from the Mayoral Combined Authority who are administrating this for central government. We have Paul Johnson with us this morning. He's a senior economic policy advisor, and what he's going to be able to do is talk us through the assessment process and the sort of decision-making process for that fund, because as Rachel said at the beginning of the event, UK CRF is indeed a precursor to a fund that will launch in spring next year, which is the Shared Prosperity Fund. So it's quite a while off, but we do think it's really worth you considering and starting to think about how you might make connections to form relationships with other organisations to form a consortium, because that's what you'll need in order to go for the Shared Prosperity Fund. We won't unfortunately have time for questions after this, but the plan is we would like to revisit this fund in our next charity hub in September, so we can talk more broadly about it then. So if Paul, I can't just see you here on my screen, but I do believe you're here in the room. I will mute myself, so if you can try and share your screen, I'll hand over to you.
Excellent, thanks Emma. Right, sorry, I'll just yeah, I'll get the slides up for you. Can everyone see that?
We might need to make you a co-host, so bear with me. Oh, looks like something is, there we go.
Is it working?
It is.
Excellent.
We just need to go to present mode.
Right, so is it working then, Emma? Sorry, can everyone see the slides?
We can see it. I think if you just make the screen bigger, you know, the option.
Yeah, sorry, let's try and move this out of the way. Yeah.
Smashing.
Okay, right, so yeah, morning everyone, and thanks for inviting me in to speak about the UK Community Renewal Fund. And I think Caroline just mentioned about the dentist. This at times felt a bit like root canal surgery. So obviously this was set up by central government, and yeah, just to provide a very brief bit of context, is that it's a £220 million scheme, very tight deadlines. It's got to be out the door by the end of this year. I suppose the objectives of it were great because it was all about trying to support the people and communities most in need across the country. The issue with it was that it's only 220 million. So we had a maximum we could bid for in South Yorkshire for 12 million, because it's £3 million per place. But the government actually identified 100 priority places across the UK. So the numbers don't work out from the start, because if all 100 areas got the 3 million, it's over the total anyway. And there's another 300 places that weren't priority areas. So you can see that the funding scale of it was nowhere near matched at the actual need. But just to provide a little bit of context, is that yes, so some of you might have been involved in European funding in the past, and I think Rachel mentioned earlier that this scheme, the CRF, is the precursor to the Shared Prosperity Fund. That's the big game in town that is coming from next year, from April 2022, and that is the replacement for what we have for the European Structural Investment Funds. Some of you might know of. It's a world of acronyms in economic development. So ESF, the European Social Fund, or ERDF, the Regional Development Fund, those pots of money, the Shared Prosperity Fund will replace that. The Community Renewal Fund was just a 12-month pilot, saying a very one-year thing to test ideas in advance of the Shared Prosperity Fund. But I say that the pot of money, if you look at it, it was round about 1.3 billion a year previously. It's going to be similar as we move forward, but for this year it's just 220 million. So never mind the timescales, the funding allocation really didn't match the scale of what we needed. So really, I just want to go over some of the real challenges that we had of this. The main thing was the deadlines, really tight timescales, not just for us who were at the MCA, who's administering this process, but for all the people out in South Yorkshire who were applying for this. I mean, we had so little time just to get this out there. We put a webinar on, but in terms of, we tried to give as much time as possible for people to bid into the process. And we tried to minimise our assurance process on this to give people as much time as possible. But even then, we're only talking about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks to get bids together. I mean, to be honest, I mean, this is not in any way how we would have designed this. This is what government set us up to do this. We were nominated as a lead authority who had to administer this. But we just had the football on with the Euros. People who know the football, we describe this as a hospital pass. They almost set us up to fail. This is not how we would have wanted to do it. But I saying that the main problem we had was the tight deadline, because one of the things that we really wanted from this process, and if we were doing this, we'd want to be much more strategic, would be for charities and local organisations to speak to each other, to work together, to try and get collaborative bids. That's what we really wanted, and that's what this CRF actually wanted, because one of the things they specified was that they really wanted bids to be 500k or more. They wanted really big bids, and for charities and small organisations, very, very difficult to get up towards 500,000 and to be able to spend that within about 8 months. So it had to, we really needed partnership working with this. And I said it was very much about revenue as well. My main criticism of all of this would be that if we would have designed it, we'd have really wanted strategic schemes that could have had real impact and changed the economy for the people that really need it. That was the objective of the scheme. But because of the timescales and how it was designed by government, ended up that schemes that really ended up scoring well on our approval process were ones that were pretty much projects that were already on the shelf, and projects that where they already had partnerships already in place. So the local authorities were very well placed for this, because they already had some big schemes, and they already worked very closely with key partners such as the local colleges and the Chambers of Commerce and other partners like that. So it was very difficult for charities, and there was cross-boundary bids as well that were encouraged, but there just wasn't time to engage those partnership organisations to really get the quality of bids that we wanted. And so government was after this, because the process was that we had to assess all these bids and then submit our listing to government. The next slide should show that. Yeah, so this is a list of bids that we submitted to government on behalf of our 4 areas. And you'll see that there's the universities and the local authorities did well on this, because of the scale of the project and the time scale, that just in terms of how we assured that in our assurance processes, that they just ended up scoring well on this. In the end, I like to be frank and honest, this probably wouldn't have been the bids that we would have wanted to submit at the start of this process. If we'd have done it differently, we'd have had more time. If we could have designed it differently, I'm sure this list would have looked very differently. But it was just kind of, we had to deal the best with it of the hand that we were given. So that's how we had to approach it. It was the design of the process was flawed, but we just had to make the best of it that we could. Now, what I would say is, though, so I've painted a very negative picture there, really, and we're still waiting to hear back, because we submitted that over a month ago, and now it was a very arduous, time-consuming, and quite frustrating process for us, actually. So I can imagine it was for the people bidding into this as well. But I've spoken to colleagues at other combined authorities across the country. They all said exactly the same thing. So it's not just me whinging. This has been replicated. The same discussions will be had in West Yorkshire, in Greater Manchester, in Liverpool, in the North East, in the Midlands. It was a nightmare for everyone. But what I would say is that this is the government designed that for this year. The big game in town is the Shared Prosperity Fund, because this will be over. They've already committed to this in the spending review. It'll be roughly about 1.5 billion a year for the UK. They said it's going to be targeted on need. Won't go into politics of all of that, but it's kind of, in the past, South Yorkshire has done well from European funding. We hope this will be the case going forward, and we're lobbying for that. But I would say the objectives of the Community Renewal Fund were great. That's what we wanted. And that's what this Shared Prosperity Fund is going to be. So all those issues that I raised about not having time to speak to partners and establish relationships and get some collaborative projects, there is potential to do some of this in advance of the Shared Prosperity Fund. This is coming in April 2022. I won't advise people to spend lots of time on this, but if you can establish links, if you're a charity or a small organisation, some key partners that are working on skills projects similar to you, or you think these could be a good ally of what you're trying to do, to really make the scale of your impact bigger, it is worth exploring that in advance, because this was a very rushed process for the Community Renewal Fund. But the Shared Prosperity Fund, if it follows the same as European funding, because that was over a 7-year period, we'd hope it will be more strategic, the timeframes will be longer, and there's more opportunity then to develop really good relationships with partner organisations across the region, so we can get some really stronger bids. And I would much hope I could talk to this group in the future that would be really trying to submit lists to government that would have very strategic projects with big impacts that could really affect the communities and the people that need it. Unfortunately, the way this CRF was designed, what happened was it was projects that were almost good to go off the shelf and ones that was deliverable. That's not the way we want to do that. I've got more hope for the Shared Prosperity Fund, and my advice would be, if you've got the time, try and speak to similar kind of organisations who are working in a similar kind of field to you. You might have similar ideas of how you could collaborate, of what kind of projects you could put into us, because we will be looking for bids that can make investment in terms of skills, productivity, education, all the kind of usual factors that can really target the most left behind communities. So if you can make those contacts over the next few months, I think that would be great, and that would be my advice to you. So it was a frustrating process, but hopefully the next time for the Shared Prosperity Fund, it will be not as arduous as this one was. I'll leave it there.
Paul, thank you so much for that. Paul was very kind and stepped into the breach rather late in the day to do this.
Stop my presentation.
It stopped, don't worry.
All right, great.
So thanks again, Paul. As I said, it might be good for us to pick up again in September with this, and it certainly sounds like it couldn't be a more painful process next time round. So here's hoping that the next round will be a little bit easier. I'm going to pass over to Julia Fletcher, my colleague, now, because it's time for the prize draw, and we've got 2 minutes to go. So we've done ever so well. Everyone's kept to time. I'm absolutely delighted with that. So Julia, I will hand over and stop wittering now.